Alright, this is a video essentially concerning the thought that goes into armor and how that relates to the current meta of the combat system of Adventures in Cardboard. So here are three wonderful images that I have a line traced out of three different sets of armor that shall help to describe some of the thought process that go into the designing, not the manufacturing, but the designing of different sets of armor. And essentially, it all really boils down to this wonderful, awful process that every AIC armorsmith goes on through their trip through the years. Essentially, it all starts with a problem. Oh no, I'm being killed. They're losing fights by getting stabbed when they couldn't either stab their opponent faster, so they were often worse at sword tag or just younger or a variety of different things, but essentially there's a problem and they wish to amend it by implementing armor. The second realization that is made based off the first is all of the times I am being killed in the same localized area. All of my tags out are being tagged out on my arms, for example, is probably the most common tag zone. Most kids will overextend their arms and get punished by a slap on the forearm by their opponent's weapon. And so the logical third conclusion based off these first two is I should protect that spot. And so they start off with like bracers or something, like short little gauntlets that essentially just cover from wrist to about elbow. And they do a pretty good job at overall reducing the amount of average deaths that you have. From this then, they go out into the field again, die less, but still die, and they realize that, oh no, I'm being killed in some other place, in some other spot of their body. Often this then shifts either to forearm, to torso, sometimes to legs, but that normally comes after they build torso armor. So now they realize that all of their deaths now are no longer on their arms because they're armored and now in this new spot. So then the armorsmith will put time into attempting to design armor to protect that new spot. And essentially it's just this evolution of finding old weaknesses and putting on more armor there, dying less but still dying, and then figuring out new places to put armor. And this essentially continues until you either go mad or become God. So ad infinitum. The most common progression of armoring spots essentially pretty much goes arms, torso, legs, and then gaps. So I've kind of split this sort of very basic thing into a sort of a more overarching kind of description of how it goes, and it's the 5 stages of armoring. The first stages are the big holes. Well, it shouldn't even be called the big holes because the first stage is you go from no armor to any armor, to literally anything. So that could be your first bracer. Often it's the first chest plate that's really the big step forward in someone realizing, wow, when I wear this chest plate, I go from dying about like once every 2 minutes to once every 15. Oh my goodness, this is very useful. This progresses on then to smaller and smaller holes. So after you go from having gauntlet and a chest plate, you realize that all of your tag zones are happening in your upper arms, the gap, the section in between these two sets of armor. So in my case, I developed these very large pauldrons that help to protect kind of the upper arm and shoulder section of the armor. They do extremely well, and they're relatively easy to manufacture. And so they were a very prominent feature of many of my early sets of armor because they were one of the big pieces that covered one of the small holes that's hard to armor. Then you start getting into gaps, getting into little sections where two pieces somehow are aligned on top of one another or not yet aligned on top of one another, and so there's a gap in between there, and so you can be attacked in that gap. One instance of a covered gap that is kind of just a symptom on most armor is you have a leg set down here and then an upper torso piece with which all of the top pieces are attached, and there's this waist kind of joint that needs to rotate a little bit and yaw and pitch, kind of, so you have full, or not really full waist mobility, but enough so that you can actually fight and run. If you don't have anything, Then your waist will be about at your waistband, but the upper torso piece, to still give you that mobility, will be a little bit above it. And so you have this awkward 3-inch gap where you just keep getting killed. And so that's the sort of gap that in phase 3, armor smiths will have to look at their pre-existing armor and try to cover those last little couple things that make it just a better set and a better system. So in this case, this black armor here, which is probably my favorite one that I've ever made, honestly. I really like this current one that I have, but I'm a real sucker for the design of this. Is pretty much a phase 3 or a phase 4 armor. I call it a phase 3.9 because it's starting to be redesigned, and that I'll go into on the next slide. But there's some things where I've realized this system can only get so good. There are a couple things that are just physical limitations where I have to go back and think of new ways to do things to be able to progress forward. And that is personified in this suit. Instead of having a waist piece that goes over your torso piece, you have a torso piece that goes over, and then you have this new little technique here, which was a pain to learn. It took me about 8 or 9 years to actually do it well. And they're called lames. And they're extremely effective because they provide a really high level of mobility. And as you can see, they fit very tightly. And so they're also very protective. So this is kind of the redesign that I'm talking about, where you can't get much better from here. And so you have to shift to something new. And that's phase 5, where you start dealing with like, well, cardboard isn't elastic, or plasticor in this case. So there are some things it just can't do. But you can get around it by adding lames and by being stretchy in other places. So to kind of show this in one specific concrete example, one of the things in my armor that's really, really developed over the years has been my knees and my leg armor. The phase 1 kind of that we had were these two sets here, where it was literally just 2 tubes and then a stick connecting them with a fluid joint at the knee. This was so unbelievably terrible. It was so simple. Like, I got tagged on the knees a ton because there's, again, no armor covering it. Super duper basic set. But it was the first big phase 1 of I was getting tagged on the thigh, and now that I have thigh armor, I'm not getting tagged there anymore. This progressed a little bit when I added a kind of crappy knee plate, but it wasn't actually all that good because every time you fold your knee up, the knee plate moves. And so you lose that level of protection. Phase 2 then is shifting from a knee plate that is attached to the top and then loose on the bottom to one that is attached on the sides on both the top and the bottom pieces. So this means that when your leg moves, the knee piece also moves, but in theory it moves to cover the area that of your knee that is exposed. Unfortunately, with all of these, you have still one very large phase 2 gap, which is your back of the knee. The back of the knee is a part of the tag zone in this current house rule of AIC combat systems. So that's a huge vulnerability because people can just run up behind you and stab you in the back of the leg. And it happens a lot and it really sucks. But that's what phase 2 armor is. Phase 3 armor is taking what you have here and looking how you can cover this final last little kind of hole and figuring out some other way that you can get rid of this problem. And so there's actually a big shift here in phase like 3 and then like 3.5 or like 3.75 or something like that. This one is where, so the area that is covering this back of the tackle of kind of the knee area is a strip that carries down from the top, goes over top of the knee section, but it leaves 2 gaps on either side, and then it continues down. And the reason for that is because this knee section, to put it on, this was a little Velcro here, and these 2 side doors would flip open so that you could slide your knee in to get into the set. But because of that, you can't do any cross bracing because then you have no mobility and then you can't like get in or out of it. And so it's a good extra step to take, but it's not anywhere near perfect. And if you try to connect it around the sides, the cardboard will just tear, and it's not really a good thing. You cannot progress that much further from here. So this is starting to be redesigned. all of these previous sets, excluding the phase 1, were all Velcro enter in through the back. But this set, this 3.5, is a slide in from the top. It is a lot more of a hassle to get on, but that couple extra seconds of hassle is definitely worth the protection. The difference between this set and this set is, instead of the piece protecting the back of your knee being a flat that's laid over the top of the length of your leg, it's a horizontal. And so this piece is actually a full circle, and so is the one inside of it. So you have to slide actually your full leg in to get in the armor, but it is way, way, way better because it's a lot harder to get either in from above or in from below than when you can just slide along the side of the leg and get into it here. Now, phase 4. This is where I started using Plasticore, and so certain things didn't really work all that great, and I'll get into that. So the big takeaway is, because of the way this tackle is, it's almost impossible to seal these two big holes. It's really, really hard. And so the best thing you can do is to morph the tackle into being from this square shape into more of a cylindrical shape, and then move it up the leg. So there's actually this like area here that slides, and it's still tied on either side just with paracord, but this whole thing slides, and then the middle section deforms when your leg bends beyond the extendable reach. But the issue with that is that Plasticore doesn't bend. It just gets sharp, and it cuts in the tendons in the back of your leg. It's awful. I mean, it's really great stuff because it's waterproof, and it's like probably easily 5 times as durable as cardboard, given the same wear and tear. But this redesign here, while it technically was more protective than any of the previous sets, the phase 3.5 was just better. It just provided so much more mobility, so much more comfort. This was even easier to get in and out of than this one was. And the Sabaton, which was implemented in phase 2 because I was getting darted and arrowed in the foot, the Sabaton went from just being a shoe covering to actually a boot that slid inside the greave. That was such a bad idea. It just limited my ankle mobility so much. It was just kind of a scam. So now the current system I've got going on that you would have been able to see in the previous set here. So this is phase 5 leg armor, and it's when I started implementing lames that I was talking about before. LAMES, lames. They are thin plates that are tied with strands on the inside to allow them to be flexed, and so the plates can actually stack on top of each other, but then they can also slide out to be lined up linearly, but all still seated atop of one another, so that you don't lose the protection, but you gain this flexure that is just incredible. So now the paracord is not just tied through the inner and outer, but it's tied through the inner, the top lame, and then the outer layer, but there is no joint here at the back. So it goes from one side to the front and then back to the other side, but there's no rear connection. The only rear connection is made by, well, the top loops are still closed loops, but by the lames, which gives you this increased level of flexibility, but it's still high enough up the thigh and low enough down the shin that you don't have to worry about it. Same sort of process is actually true for the ankle as well. It's no longer a solid piece that slides into the greave, because that just reduced mobility more than I can express in words. So with here, you have this sort of like knee covering, like knee plate kind of solid piece, and then lames on the inside of the flexure. Here, you have the knee plate underneath the lames on the outside, but the same on the outside of the flexure, and then lames on the inside of the flexure. So when you run, your toe kind of curls up towards your shin so you can spring off with more energy, and the lames are able to contract to accommodate that. So I'm very, very happy with this armor. It looks kind of dorky because the lames aren't tied down particularly well, so it kind of just looks like whole plates, but they are very, very good. They give a ton of mobility, and they're really good against archers, which is kind of what they're designed, is literally what they were designed to do way back in phase 2. So those are the 5 phases of AIC armor. So knowing this, we have to now begin to look at combat systems in general. So, I wrote out the other day a list of all the things that can hit you. And this of course, heavily depends on house rules. Sometimes they'll exclude or include different things. This whole magic system that I have up here, this is my house rule magic system. These are the spells that I think are good. Slowness and weakness are area of effect debuff spells. Gust and Petrify, those are normally in the game. Gust, you throw it at and they have to back up. Petrify, you throw it at them, and if it hits, they freeze in place per unit time. Fireball is a one target damage spell, so you just throw it at them, and if it hits them, they just die. Cleanse is the kind of counter to both negative status effects and to Fireball, where if someone has been debuffed in some way, you can cleanse them within a unit time that is denoted by house rules. So it's like within 3 seconds after getting fireballed, if you get cleansed, you stay alive, which is all well and good. 2 other positive status effects that are normally only given through relic powers or through very rarely enchantments on weapons. But enchantments are kind of frowned upon. If anyone knows about the whole Julian says arguments, yeah, this is enchantments. Strength enchantment, where your strength or sharpness, essentially, your sword is able to pierce through armor. It acts like it's not even there. Oftentimes there's a downside to that enchantment, but just as a positive status effect, it pierces armor. And then Berserk is the other positive status effect, which goes through armor. But you cast it on one of your teammates, and then that teammate is unkillable for a certain period of time, often 5 or 10 seconds, depending on the thing. It's also normally a relic power. But then after their period of invincibility, they are instantly killed and cannot be revived except by a respawn. So, yeah, for like 5 seconds, they'll be invincible, and then they have to go die and go back to respawn. So these are house spells, and these are neither here nor there as far as a general kind of combat system. The real shenanigans occurs down here in physical type attacks. So the most common attack in the game are swords. Swords are unbelievably common. They're the most popular weapons for a good reason. They're really good weapons. You can maneuver in through gaps in armor very, very well with them, or at least better than any of the other weapons that exist in the combat system. But short swords do not pierce armor, nor long swords. Vanguards, they don't pierce armor. They're just good weapons. You can maneuver through armor plates if you can find a chink and you can shove your sword in the gap and tag them out. That's a thing. But they don't go through armor, and all of the rest of these do. So, like, even though these are the most common, most of the other weapon types in the game go through armor, which is kind of weird. Dagger attacks. Daggers are weapons like swords, but they are limited in length. They used to have a 6-inch limit, but now that armor's become more popular, they've tried to do some balancing, and they've increased the maximum length of a dagger to 8 inches beyond the hand. For reference, the length of a short sword is roughly 20 inches to 24 inches. I normally cut mine at about 18 because I want to give my opponent a little bit more of a chance, but about 20 to 24, so less than half of the length of a short sword, a dagger is, but it pierces armor. So you have to get in a lot closer and get yourself a lot more vulnerable, but it pierces through armor. Now, bludgeon attacks, on the other hand, they're always two-handed weapons. They can be of length of one-handed, or they can be of two-handed length. So 36 inches for a two-handed, 20 to 24 for a one-handed, and then, I guess you could do a dagger bludgeon, but that kind of invalidate the point of a bludgeon. It is a large weapon that specifically has to have a very 3D head. That is very, very relevant because they are like hammers or pauldrons, or not pauldrons, hammers or, what are the axes on sticks called? I've forgotten. But they're big old weapons that can bash through armor. They act as if it is not there, and they can tag anywhere in the regular hit zone. That's kind of absurd. They have a really big negative of the fact that they're rather slow given their necessitated large size. And then arguing is always done whether or not it's a valid bludgeon. But man, A dude with a 36-inch warhammer can just kind of ruin your day, even if you're in full armor. And the last one is arrow attacks. Arrow attacks are, they're all right. So the way in which they are normally done, which I have a bit of an issue with, but I think it is quite reasonable. At least I enjoy the benefit of it. So the way they're currently done is arrows are allowed to pierce through armor if you are not wearing a helmet. If you are wearing a helmet, all of your armor becomes invulnerable to arrows. Of course, if you get hit in a spot where you're not armored, you still die. But all of the armor you do have becomes arrow resistant if you're wearing a helmet. And arrows and all of these weapons, your head is not a hitbox. So it's not like you're going to get shot in the head and be like, hey, you're out. No, that's just dumb. But they will protect your pre-existing armor from... Helmet will protect your pre-existing armor from arrow attacks, which kind of really devalues archers. It only is really good when you have an enemy that's out on the trail that doesn't have a helmet but has armor and just hasn't bothered to make one yet. So really you can only catch them once or twice with an arrow when they don't have a helmet yet. Because really any armorsmith worth their salt should just go make a helmet. Like, it's not that hard. It's just a circlet around your head with like some plates on top. So yeah, I wish they were much stronger than they currently are. Like magic is kind of, in many ways it's really nerfed, but fireball is kind of absurd because it goes through shields, and so there's not really a great way of defending for it. But I wish arrows were a little stronger. That's just my personal thing. I really like bows and arrows, and I love volleys of archers. So yeah. So based on this kind of what can kill you, here is the meta evolution. This is kind of the whole path that armor smiths go through, but like the whole path. So again, the first one is I'm getting killed by swords. So the first step is making armor. Every place they get killed by a sword, they make armor to prevent them getting killed by a sword. And then this feedback loop happens where they just keep protecting more and more spots with better and better armor. And that's kind of what I'm stuck in. That's why I'm in like phase 5 armor, for goodness sake. I mean, I really enjoy making it, but you don't actually need that good of armor. You just need phase 3 or better. Well, you can even do it with phase 2. A lot of people have phase 2. But they have armor, but not a helmet, and they just keep making more and more armor. But then, sometime, they come across an archer, and they get shot in the chest and realize, oh, wait, I need a helmet. Or perhaps a shield, but most often, it'll be, if people like often really like vanguards but don't like dying, they'll start making armor but keep using their vanguard, and then they'll come across an archer, get shot, make a helmet, but... Now this helmeted knight with a vanguard will start getting killed by daggers and bludgeoning weapons, and they shall come to the startling realization that vanguards are just bad and shields are better. That is an opinionated statement. That is a rather contentious topic, but that's my stance on it. Shields, knight class. So a knight class is a short sword and a shield with full armor. Knight classes are the best class in the game. They can take on the most people simultaneously with the best chance of actually not getting slaughtered. I have 5v1'd as a knight class, or 1v5 rather. I've taken on 5 people, and I had to double death with the last guy because they surrounded me. But knight class, when you have a shield and a short sword and you're good at using it, you can do some really absurd things, and it works out. So this is kind of good. This is like the level of invulnerability that most very high-end fighters get to in their whole career. You get a shield with full armor and a short sword, and then you just start getting better and better at sword fighting, and you learn how to dispatch opponents quicker and quicker, and how to avoid daggers better and use your shield better. Kind of shield mastery. Yeah, this is meta to ditch the vanguard. Just, it's not worth it. They're fun. If it's a relic, maybe, but give the relic to somebody else. Use a shield. You're just better. Armor is so good, but it's only really at its peak when you also have a shield. Then, here's where things start to get kind of... I think I might be one of the only people that does this because I think it's really, really scummy. But it is the meta evolution. This is where you go if you want to keep not dying or keep getting better. So you realize that, oh no, I'm getting killed by magic attacks like fireballs. So in the last week of AIC I did, it might have been a couple weeks before the last one, I kept coming across this same mage, and they just kept using fireballs. And I swear to God, it was like the first time I just walk up and they throw a fireball at me, and I instinctively deflect it with my shield like you would an arrow. But fireballs go through shield, so I die from that one. And the next one I come across, I run up to him. He throws his first fireball. I block it with my sword, and then he takes out another one and throws the other one, and then kills me with that one. So now I'm 2 fireballs deep in death. So go back, respawn, come back again the next day or something like that. And so I see this guy. I know what's about to happen. I pull out my sword. I'm prepared to block these fireballs. I block one, move in closer, block the second one. Now, I thought he only had 2 mana balls, which he did, but he picked up one of the ones on the ground and chucked it back at me. He used 3 fireballs! Oh my god! And I died from that one, so... Fireballs. Mages, when used well and used to target knights especially, mages can be super duper good. I wish they were valued more by the average AIC population, but there just aren't enough knights for it to really be that important, so people don't use it as much. But yeah, fireballs are kind of cracked, but the best way of defending against them, in theory, I haven't actually tried this yet, is if you get a secondary weapon, which is essentially has a large enough flat surface area to be used like a tennis racket and deflect the mana balls. I've thought about this so much, and I'm pretty convinced that if you held a sword that had a thick enough blade, a wide enough blade that you could use it to deflect mana balls, you could effectively bull rush the mage with your tennis racket and just deflect everything they threw at you until you got close enough to stab them, and then you'd win the fight. So it would be a quick switch from, you can't sheath the shield, but putting away your shield, grabbing out this tennis racket implement, and then going after the mage and run him down and smack him with your tennis racket. So now that you've defended yourself from like pretty much everything except for like strength, but strength doesn't go through shield, so if you're just able to run away and hide behind your shield, you'll survive that too. Like, you're so incredibly goated now that either the opponent can't do anything, or you will only die to like backstabs or something like that. You won't actually die in fair 1v1s. You'll die because people with daggers run up behind you and just smack you, and that's just depressing. And that's kind of the spot where I'm at, where I'm either getting killed by mage attacks just constantly, or I'm only dying to backstabs. Not even relics, because if you come up against someone with a big enough relic and you just understand what its power is fast enough, you can often avoid an instant death scenario by either running away or kiting to be able to get them in a bad spot to just take them out. But man, the backstabs, you just, no matter how much of a swivel your head is on, it's so hard to avoid backstabs. You have to be constantly vigilant. It's like the whole 21 rule with the police. Like, you have to be watching out for like a 20 to 30 foot bubble around you, because people can cross that distance in like a second and a half or 2. It's just so unfortunate. It's so hard to get around. It's just not a great place for the meta to set, where either the armor is too strong and then it's oppressive and not fun, or the armor is too weak and then there's no point in the armor, and so then it's just cripplingly boring. And neither one is really what I want it to be, but that's kind of where it is right now. So yeah, it's just not great for armored combat. The armor is either too strong and it's just unplayable, because like when you have a fight between 2 armored tanks that have these massive riot shields and full armor, there's practically no way for either one of them to kill the other. And so what they end up doing is just locking shields and then trying to go in circles to get their dagger around the shield of the other. But if you just keep like taking a step back and taking a step forward, these fights go on forever and nothing ever happens. It's just so boring. For a while there, they implemented one-handed bludgeoning weapons, where knights would have a shield in one arm and then a bludgeon in the other, that was an absurd meta because it was me and one other guy this one week where we both had armor that was good enough that it was pretty hard to get a sword in. Mine was better, but it wasn't easy per se. And we would just walk up, go shield to shield, and swing our bludgeoning weapons, and whoever connected first won. It was, again, like a not particularly enjoyable meta. It was still kind of fun, but it just made for really short fights and then a long walk back to respawn. So it wasn't really the kind of intense aspect I was going for. That made the game fun. It was because armor was just so weak. There was, like, you would pretty much just use a shield and a regular sword, or just a one-handed bludgeon, because the bludgeon would just go through the armor anyway. Like, there's almost no point for it. So the idealistic, the perfect meta, which I don't know if it exists, but I'm just gonna list a bunch of unreasonable demands and we'll see what happens, is this game mode that I've thought a lot about, and I talked about it with Julian, but it's called Ultra Tactical. It's this radical concept that's essentially like Dominion League. It's teams of independent AIC goers who are working on armor and strategy and even fighting just outside of the actual weeks. And then like on weekends, they come together, set up 2 castles, and then have ranked matches in between 2 teams of like 5 or 2 teams of 7 or something like that. They have ranked matches, and there are a bunch of teams around the area, and they meet up different places and have a bunch of different games and tournaments and stuff, but it's competitive AIC, which would just be so much fun. And it's the nth degree of all of the metas. They have really, really good archers, really, really powerful mage spells, but actually like complicated casting requirements, so you can't just pick up your mana balls. You have to like say a mantra or something. But then you could also have stuff like the debuffs. You can have area of effect debuffs, like a weakness, for example. It's an AoE debuff with a range that would be decided through house rules, where you throw it at the ground and everyone within like a, let's say, 10-foot area loses 1 hand of strength per unit time. So like literally, if you have a sword and a shield, 2 hands worth of equipment, you have to drop one of them for like 10 seconds or something. So you have to disarm one of your 2 arms for a certain amount of time, and it's an area of effect spell. And so if you have a really good mage who is really good at lobbing spells up, man, if you debuff the enemy line and you hit it right in the center of their area and you take away all of their shields all at once, you could just swarm over them. If it's a bunch of dudes left with either bludgeons or daggers or something, like, man, that'd be such a powerful mage ability. And actually, like, good archers. I kind of think that arrows should go through armor. I know there's, like, that might be something that needs more testing, but man, arrows are just so cool, but helmets just kind of invalidate their existence entirely. There's just no point to them. If you just have people with like even a modicum of armor and a helmet, just don't even try. Just go in with a dagger. It'll be, the win rate is just higher. So it's very sad to me. But and then the kind of like the most impossible of the impossible tasks is designing a new combat system that makes armor very strong, that is corresponding to the amount of time and effort that it takes to create the new armor. So not like it's super weak where anybody with a stick with a rock on the end, a bludgeoning weapon, can just walk up and tap you once and you die. But also not like, okay, you have to find a gap, but the only way of doing that is by like ripping the opponent's armor off their body. That's a horrible meta, because then you get into battle blindness and stuff, and it's just gross. You don't want it to settle there. So trying to figure out some way of making it intriguing and like still intense to fight, but also good in team fights, not just good in duels. Some new combat system I think is in order. Perhaps for the 10-year past. I'm on 9 years. Yeah, I don't know. But designing some new system for AIC, because this just ain't it. It needs something new. I don't know what, but it needs something new. And perhaps someday, I don't know when, and it's not as important as like a new sword meta, but like maybe bikes, like mounted, like like chariots and stuff. Man, that'd be really cool. Like vehicles. You could have like dragons or something where it was just like this bike frame amalgam that a bunch of kids rode on and then jumped off of, and like they had fights and they like could throw down water balloons that were like dragons. I don't know. That just sounds fun. Anyway, that's the end of this wonderfully awfully long video here. I'll probably crop it down more. But the camp is Adventures in Cardboard. Here's their website, adventuresincardboard.com. Here's their Instagram. Their last post was like 52 weeks ago. Instagram.com/cardboardadventuresin. And here's their YouTube channel. So yeah, I really love building armor. It's one of my greater. It probably just is my biggest hobby, and I really like seeing other people build armor. I have lots of pictures of other people's armor, but I chose not to include any of them, just my stuff, because it was more about the overlying concept of it than it really was about examples of it. Well, I guess this was the whole thing, but more to illustrate the concept. But I hope we can all work together to figure out some new fun combat system, ideally so that we can eventually start playing Ultra Tactical, because that would be cool. Because if we could start doing that, man, I would totally like instantly invest in like 3 more GoPros and like set up tripods or like drones or something and get like aerial footage, and man, super complicated rules, actual like team names and team logos and themes and stuff, and that would be super cool. I don't know if it'll ever become reality, but until then, thanks for watching. Subscribe. I don't really care about likes. It might help the algorithm. I don't actually know. I think watch time affects that more. And this video is so damn long that I don't think people are gonna watch this through. Perhaps some people might. Yeah. Thanks for sticking around. See ya.